and has promised to return. So I'm going to ask him now to deliver some brief remarks to all of you.
Thank you. And I know Pat, I could just go Pat, but in these cases, thank you, Madam Chair. And I will certainly want to recognize the Executive Director of the Caribbean Environmental Health Institute, Andy Phillip from CWWA, Mr. Victor Poyet from COWASA, Mr. Trescott Suku from the National Water and Sewage Commission, Chairman of the National Water and Sewage Commission, Mr. Andrew Mitchell from the Water Resources Management Agency, the media, the staff of SEHI and the staff of the Ministry of Sustainable Development, Energy, Science and Technology, and all other invited representatives here. Of course, this activity is taking place against the background of the year 2013, which has been designated as the United Nations, by the United Nations as the International Year of Water Cooperation. And so, in a very real way, this collaborative activity here today reinforces this notion of collaborating for water. However, I want to focus my remarks largely on our main distributor, WASCO, for which the government is the sole owner, and to speak more from a policy perspective where that is concerned. I'm sure there will be discussions on other aspects of water distribution, water management in St. Lucia. But I thought that perhaps, given the short time that we have and the short time that I have here, that perhaps I need to focus some attention on the matter of WASCO. WASCO is responsible for the provision of potable and wastewater services for St. Lucia. The existing method for funding the provision of these services has never been and continues to be an unsustainable method. Some are of the view that the funding through tariff adjustments is adequate, but we know that this is not sufficient, and the revenue stream has not been able to allow for efficient maintenance of the assets and replacement, or even debt servicing for WASCO. Tariff adjustments must be realistic and consistent with the provisions of the law. In the case of St. Lucia, WASCO has not received a tariff adjustment in over 12 years, and that's no fault of WASCO. Neither is the fault of the Water Service Commission. The Water Service Commission only recently came into being, and is real. The tariff review currently underway, for which there's been a lot of public discourse, is an extraordinary tariff review based on extraordinary events largely associated with Hurricane Thomas. So whilst the National Water and Sewage Commission has agreed that WASCO qualifies for an extraordinary review, the NWSC did not generally agree that WASCO should include its future investment requirements, for example, drilling for water, to supplement its existing water demand requirements. These could be included in the future investment requirements for WASCO, and even in operating services, and therefore what is being proposed in the tariff review certainly does not include future investment requirements of WASCO. And it's extremely important that that is understood, and that the demands being made of WASCO, and I'll speak to that later on, are understood within that context of what exactly is being awarded. Simply, the increase requested by WASCO was actually reduced by the National Water and Sewage Commission in its response and submission to 16.15% from an original request of 9.9% increase in the water tariff. The point being made here is that the rate increases being considered by WASCO will only consider the impacts of Hurricane Thomas largely. And there may be a few other things, but WASCO will not be in a position to benefit from increases to deal with the necessary investment of its water infrastructure development program, just based on this tariff increase. It's extremely important that that is understood. I say here, therefore, that it is may be a little unrealistic to make certain demands on WASCO's ability to meet those demands being made for greater performance when the current financing does not permit this. We all know that WASCO is an insolvent company at the moment, owes government in excess of $100 million, cannot pay its regular day-to-day operations, and therefore the funding for WASCO, the model for the funding for WASCO, needs to consider not just tariff reviews or tariff increases, but needs to go beyond that. Funding for the major assets of WASCO has been facilitated by the government of St. Lucia through borrowing and lending to WASCO. And a lot of that is submitted to WASCO is in the form of advances. Over the last few months, government has made available to WASCO advances of 4 million EC dollars to cover outstanding electricity bills. And that was on the heels of threats by the utility company to cut the electricity supply to WASCO. In addition, a further 3.1 million to mobilize for the dredging of the Roseau Dam. And that really is more for the mobilizing for the dredging of the Roseau Dam. This is expected to provide an additional 1 month worth of water in the event of an extraordinary dry season, as our Met Office has already projected less than normal rainfall expected this year. And let's not be fooled by 2 days of rain. That is not going to significantly change that picture. Other funding has been obtained through the access of grants from various donor agencies. The fundamental point being made is that the current financing arrangements for WASCO is untenable, and the model is grossly inefficient and unsustainable, and will continue to lead to WASCO's insolvency. The government of St. Lucia recognizes the gravity of the situation and proposes to develop a new business model that will allow for a public and local private sector partnership that will foster a stronger and efficient water company. In this regard, the government of St. Lucia has, over the last decade, committed to the introduction of private sector involvement in water. This policy statement has been pursued previously in conjunction with the regional and international partners, the Caribbean Development Bank, the World Bank, and the International Finance Corporation of the IMF. The focus then was on partnering with an international organization through a process championed by the World Bank. This process, however, failed to get wide public support and has since been abandoned. However, the underlying policy to attract private sector partnership has not been discarded, but the focus, as I indicated earlier, is now confined to local, private, and institutional partnerships in the first instance. The Cabinet has since appointed a committee to advise the government on the implementation of this policy. The government of St. Lucia, as indicated earlier, has articulated a preference for local involvement in this public-private partnership arrangement, which will provide that business model for WASCO. This appears to be the preferred option as a general public, and we've heard them over and over again, also through the NCA, has responded negatively to the participation of international investors in the water sector. Generally, and we understand that there is the fear that the provision of affordable potable water could be dominated by profit considerations if such a scenario should be allowed by the government. However, given the current economic downturn, coupled with the existing insolvency of WASCO, it may not be reasonable to conclude that the appetite and capacity for investment in the water sector by locals would be anything but low. The government has made it clear to the committee that any model must ensure that the poor, disadvantaged, and high-risk groups are never denied access to water because of cost or other impediments. And any model should provide for every resident to always receive a safe and consistent supply of water. To this end, I am pleased to announce that the Ministry of Social Transformation is collaborating with the Ministry of Sustainable Development to consider proposals to deal with making water available to the poor and indigent, but at the same time not subsidizing water to those who can afford to pay higher rates. any model that blankets water subsidies on certain consumption volumes of water without distinguishing ability to pay is not providing a responsible response to the management of a viable water utility. And we have examples recently made of the subsidizing of gas, of the 30-pound cylinder, to a wide cross-section of people who really can afford to pay for energy, and for which those 30-pound gallons should not be subsidized. And we need to find models that allow us to subsidize the people who really need to be subsidized. And therefore, that model is for water, is hopefully will take that into consideration as well. So given the scenario, it's necessary to develop a long-term forecast that identifies, among other things, the investment requirements for the water utility, capacity and debt equity ratios for any public-private sector arrangement, as well as resolving any short-term issues which will currently impact the viability of WASCO. And some of these preconditions obviously will conclude WASCO's debt equity agreements that we have. Certainly we have a very high debt situation. The tariff review decisions, how these are made, the consideration that we must look seriously at a triennial review in a not too distant future, and that a stable labor environment is absolutely necessary for the future viability of WASCO. And of course, the effective and efficiently run WASCO. I thank you for your kind attention, and I look forward to your discourse and for your comments on this particular view on the future for WASCO. Thanks so much.